He was freezing to death in a blizzard when he broke into an abandoned cliff cabin for shelter. But what he found frozen beneath the floorboards wasn't just survival. It was $285 million in cash, gold, and secrets that powerful men had buried for over 30 years. Before we dive into the story, make sure to smash subscribe because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. The wind came down from the peaks like something alive and angry, carrying snow so thick it erased the world. Marcus Kane had seen storms before. He'd weathered them in tents, in ice caves, in nothing but a hollow beneath a fallen pine. But this one was different. This one wanted him dead. He was 43 years old, broad-shouldered and weather-beaten, with a beard that had more grey than brown and hands scarred from a lifetime of rough work. He'd been a wilderness guide once, back when he still cared about people, back when he had someone to come home to. That was 7 years ago, before the accident, before Sarah and Emma drove off that mountain road in February rain and never came back. After that, Marcus stopped guiding. He stopped talking much at all. He moved deeper into the Rockies, built a cabin 15 miles from the nearest road, and learned to live with silence. Most days, that was enough. He hunted elk and deer, trapped beaver and marten, sold pelts twice a year to a trader who asked no questions. He read by firelight, split wood until his shoulders ached, and tried not to think about the sound of his daughter's laugh or the way his wife used to hum while cooking breakfast. The mountains didn't judge, they didn't pity, they just were. And that was all Marcus needed. Until today. He'd left his cabin before dawn, planning a quick supply run to a cache he kept near Widow's Pass, maybe 12 miles out. The weather had been clear, cold but calm, the kind of November morning that made you believe winter might hold off a little longer. He'd packed light, a day pack with jerky, a thermos of coffee, matches, a tarp, and his rifle. He'd be back before dark. Easy. By noon, the sky had changed. Clouds rolled in fast and low, heavy and bruised. The temperature dropped 15 degrees in less than an hour. Marcus quickened his pace, cutting through a dense stretch of spruce and lodgepole pine. He knew these mountains, every ridge and ravine, every game trail and water source. But nature didn't care what you knew. Nature had its own rules. The snow started as a whisper, light flakes drifting through the trees. Within 20 minutes, it was a curtain. Within 40, it was a wall. The wind picked up, howling through the valleys, bending trees, and turning the snow into a blinding horizontal assault. Visibility dropped to less than 10 feet, then 5, then nothing. Marcus pulled his hood tight and kept moving, each step deliberate. He'd veered off course somewhere, lost the trail in the whiteout. His compass told him west, but west meant nothing when every direction looked the same. The cold gnawed through his layers, biting at his face, his fingers, his chest. He'd been out in weather like this before, but never this far from shelter, never this exposed. His beard iced over, his eyelashes froze together. He had to stop every few minutes to wipe his face, gasping for air that burned his lungs. The wind stole his breath before he could use it. His legs felt heavy, sluggish. That was the first sign. Hypothermia didn't announce itself with trumpets. It crept in quiet, made you slow, made you stupid, made you sit down in the snow and never get up. Marcus forced himself forward, one boot in front of the other. He couldn't feel his toes anymore. His fingers were numb inside his gloves. He tried to think, tried to orient himself, but his mind felt thick, clouded. Where was he? How far had he come? The cache was gone, irrelevant. His cabin was too far. He needed shelter, now. He stumbled over something buried in the snow, went down hard on one knee. Pain shot through his leg, sharp and clarifying. He pushed himself up, breathing hard. The wind screamed around him, a high, relentless wail. He couldn't see more than a few feet. The world was white and grey and death. Then, through the swirling chaos, he saw it. A dark shape, angular and out of place. At first, he thought it was a rock formation, a cliff face maybe, but as he staggered closer, squinting through ice-crusted eyelashes, he realized it was man-made, a structure, built into the side of the mountain, a cabin. Marcus half-walked, half-crawled toward it, his body screaming in protest. The building was small, maybe 20 feet across, constructed from timber and stone. It sat tucked against a sheer rock wall, almost invisible beneath layers of snow and decades of weather. The roof sagged in the middle, and one corner looked like it had partially collapsed, but the walls still stood. He reached the door, a thick slab of wood grey with age. It was locked or frozen shut. He didn't care which. He threw his shoulder against it once, twice. On the third hit, something splintered, and the door swung inward with a groan that sounded almost human. Marcus stumbled inside and collapsed onto the floor, gasping. The wind slammed the door shut behind him, plunging the space into near darkness. For a long moment, he just lay there, shaking, his body too cold and exhausted to move. His breath came in ragged gasps, visible in the frozen air. Even inside it was brutally cold, but at least the wind couldn't reach him. At least the snow had stopped clawing at his face. Slowly, painfully, Marcus forced himself to sit up. His hands shook as he fumbled for the small flashlight clipped to his pack. It took 3 tries to turn it on. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing the interior of the cabin. It was a single room, maybe 12 by 15 feet. The ceiling was low, supported by rough-hewn beams dark with age. The walls were bare logs, chinked with something that might have been moss or mud, mostly crumbled away now. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, its chimney disappearing up through the roof. In the corner sat a narrow cot with a rotted mattress, springs exposed like ribs. A wooden table and chair, both thick with dust, occupied the center of the room. Shelves lined another wall, holding rusted cans, jars with unidentifiable contents, and tools so old they looked like artifacts. But what struck Marcus most was how intact everything was. Abandoned, yes, but not destroyed. Not ransacked by animals or weather. The door had been locked. The windows, though filthy, were unbroken. Someone had sealed this place up and left it, maybe decades ago, and it had sat here ever since, waiting. Marcus's survival instincts overrode his curiosity. He needed fire. Without heat, he'd be dead by morning, shelter or not. He dragged himself to the fireplace and shone his light inside. The chimney looked clear, no obvious blockage. Beside the hearth sat a metal box. Marcus pried it open. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were matches, kindling, and several pieces of split wood, dry as bone. Someone had prepared this. Someone had left supplies for exactly this situation. His fingers were so numb he could barely grip the matches. It took 6 tries before one finally struck. He held the tiny flame to the kindling, coaxing it, willing it to catch. It smoked, flickered, and then bloomed into fire. Marcus added more kindling, then a piece of wood. The fire grew, pushing back the darkness, filling the small space with crackling warmth. He stripped off his wet outer layers and hung them near the fire, then wrapped himself in his tarp and sat as close to the flames as he dared. His body shook violently as it tried to warm itself. His teeth chattered so hard his jaw ached, but slowly, agonizingly, sensation returned to his extremities, bringing with it a pins and needles pain that made him hiss. He'd made it, barely. Outside, the storm continued its assault, wind howling like something wounded. Inside, the firelight danced across the cabin walls, casting long shadows that seemed to move with a life of their own. Marcus stared into the flames, his mind slowly clearing as his core temperature rose. He was alive. That was step 1. Step 2 was figuring out where the hell he was and how long this storm would last. Step 3 was getting home. But for now, for this moment, he just sat and let the fire do its work. As the warmth seeped deeper into his bones, Marcus became more aware of his surroundings. The cabin had an odd quality to it, a feeling he couldn't quite name. It wasn't just old, it was preserved, intentionally so. He'd seen plenty of abandoned structures in the backcountry, old mining camps and hunting shacks and homesteads left to rot. They were always trashed by weather, animals, or scavengers. But this place was different. Sealed, protected. His eyes wandered to the shelves. He stood slowly, his legs unsteady, and moved closer. The cans were ancient, their labels faded or missing entirely. Some brands he recognized from childhood, things his grandmother might have bought, others he'd never seen before. He picked up a jar and wiped the dust from the lid. Preserved peaches, the handwriting on the label said, dated 1971. 1971, over 50 years ago. Marcus set the jar down carefully and continued his examination. On the top shelf sat a row of books, their spines cracked and faded. He pulled one down, a field guide to Rocky Mountain flora, published in 1968. Another was a journal, its leather cover soft with age. He opened it carefully. The pages were filled with tight, precise handwriting, entries dated from January through October of 1972. He skimmed a few passages, weather observations, hunting notes, supply inventories. The writing was methodical, almost clinical, but occasionally a personal detail slipped through. References to the project, mentions of maintaining security. Several passages had been heavily crossed out, rendered completely illegible. Marcus closed the journal and looked around the cabin again, this time with different eyes. This wasn't some trapper's refuge or hunter's camp. This was something else, something deliberate. He moved to the table and examined its surface. A thin layer of dust covered everything, but beneath it he could see scratches, stains, the wear of long use. In the corner of the table, someone had carved initials, RH. Beneath that, barely visible, were numbers, 1973. A photograph caught his eye, tucked into a gap between two logs. Marcus pulled it free, careful not to tear the fragile paper. It showed two men standing in front of this very cabin, both dressed in heavy winter gear. They looked military, something about their posture, their haircuts. The photo was black and white, grainy with age. On the back, written in pencil, November 72. Final supply run. Final supply run. Marcus turned the photo over again, studying the men's faces. They looked serious, hard, like men who'd seen things they couldn't talk about. What were they supplying? And why here, in the middle of nowhere? He continued searching, moving methodically through the cabin. Under the cot he found a footlocker, its lock long since rusted through. Inside were clothes, neatly folded, military surplus by the look of them. Wool pants, thermal undershirts, thick socks. Beneath the clothes, wrapped in canvas, was a pistol. Marcus recognized it immediately, a Colt 1911 military issue. He checked the magazine. Still loaded, though God knew if the ammunition was any good after 50 years. Why would someone leave a loaded weapon in an abandoned cabin? The answer came to him slowly, piece by piece. This wasn't abandoned. This was hidden. Someone had used this place for something they needed to keep secret, and when they were done, they'd sealed it up and walked away. But they'd left it ready, just in case someone needed to come back. Marcus's pulse quickened. He was warm now, thinking clearly. Every instinct he'd honed over years in the wilderness told him something was wrong here, or rather, something was very deliberately right. This cabin had been maintained, stocked, and secured by people who knew what they were doing. People with resources. People with secrets. He returned to the fireplace, adding more wood. The storm outside showed no signs of letting up. He'd be here at least until morning, maybe longer. Which meant he had time to look around, to understand what he'd stumbled into. His eyes were drawn to the floor. Most of it was rough planks, gaps visible between the boards. But near the far wall, beneath where the cot sat, the planking looked different. Tighter, more deliberate. Marcus knelt beside it, running his hands over the wood. His fingers found a seam, almost invisible, running in a square pattern about 3 feet on each side. A trapdoor. His heart hammered in his chest. He looked for a handle, a ring, anything to lift it with. Nothing. He pulled out his knife and worked the blade into the seam, prying gently. The wood resisted, swollen with age and moisture. He worked his way around the square, loosening each edge. Finally, with a crack that made him flinch, one side lifted slightly. Marcus gripped the edge and pulled. The section of floor came up slowly, hinges groaning in protest. Beneath it was darkness, a void that seemed to swallow his flashlight beam. He aimed the light down. Stairs. Wooden steps descending into what looked like a root cellar or storage space carved directly into the mountain. Cold air rushed up from below, colder even than the cabin, carrying with it a smell of earth and stone and something else. Something metallic. Marcus hesitated. Every reasonable part of his brain told him to close the hatch, wait out the storm, and leave at first light. Don't go poking around in strange places. Don't ask questions you don't want answered. But curiosity was a powerful thing, especially when you'd spent 7 years avoiding life, avoiding questions, avoiding anything that made you feel. He'd felt numb for so long. And now, standing at the edge of this hidden space, he felt something else. Something that might have been fear, or might have been excitement, or might have been the first real interest he'd had in anything since Sarah and Emma died. Marcus checked his flashlight, made sure the fire was secure, and started down the stairs. The steps were solid, carved from stone or hewn from timber so old it had petrified. They descended about 12 feet before opening into a chamber. Marcus swept his light around, trying to understand what he was seeing. The space was roughly 15 feet square, walls made of natural rock, ceiling low enough that he had to duck slightly. But it was what filled the space that made him forget to breathe. Wooden crates, dozens of them, stacked neatly against the walls, each about the size of a footlocker. They were military surplus, stenciled with numbers and codes he didn't recognize. Some were sealed with metal bands. Others had lids that looked loose, as if someone had opened them and never bothered to secure them again. But it was the cold that struck him most. The temperature down here was well below freezing, kept that way by the surrounding rock, by the elevation, by the simple fact that this chamber had been carved deep enough into the mountain to stay frozen year-round. A natural deep freeze. Marcus approached the nearest crate and lifted the lid. It came away easily, not locked, not secured. Inside, packed carefully in oilcloth, were stacks of paper. He pulled one out and unfolded it carefully. His breath caught. Money. United States currency. $100 bills bound in bundles, each bundle marked with a paper band. $10,000. He stared at it, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. He set the bundle down carefully and looked into the crate again. It was filled with them. Dozens of bundles, maybe 100. He did the math quickly. $1 million in a single crate. His hands shaking, Marcus moved to the next crate. More money. Then the next. Gold bars, each stamped with official seals and numbers. Then another crate filled with what looked like bonds, official documents with ornate borders and signatures. Then more cash. He moved through the chamber in a daze, opening crate after crate. Some held currency from different years, the bills old, some dating back to the 1960s and 70s. Others held coins, silver dollars and gold pieces. One crate was filled entirely with uncut diamonds, each stone carefully wrapped and labeled. Marcus's legs gave out. He sat down hard on the stone floor, his flashlight beam wavering. This wasn't possible. This couldn't be real. But it was. He was sitting in a frozen cellar beneath an abandoned cabin in the middle of the Rocky Mountains, surrounded by more wealth than he could comprehend. 200 million. Maybe more. Just sitting here, hidden, frozen, waiting. His mind raced. Where did this come from? Who put it here? And more importantly, who knew about it? The cabin was sealed, the trapdoor was hidden, but someone had built this chamber, filled it with fortune, and then walked away. Why? Marcus forced himself to think clearly. He pulled out his phone, knowing even as he did that there'd be no signal this deep in the mountains, especially in a stone chamber. The screen showed 0 bars. Of course. He looked around again, searching for anything that might explain this. In the far corner, tucked behind a stack of smaller boxes, he saw something different. A metal case, about the size of a briefcase, with a combination lock. Unlike everything else in the chamber, this case looked newer, less affected by time. Marcus pulled it out and examined it. The lock was secure, but the hinges were accessible. He used his knife to pop the pins and the case opened. Inside were documents, files, photographs, and a letter, sealed in plastic, addressed to whoever finds this. Marcus's hands trembled as he pulled out the letter and tore open the plastic. The paper inside was crisp, typed on what looked like an old typewriter. He read, "If you're reading this, then something went wrong. My name doesn't matter. What matters is what you found. This cash represents the proceeds from an operation that officially never happened. In 1971, a military transport carrying payment for a classified operation went down in these mountains. The official report said there were no survivors, no recovery of assets. That was a lie. We recovered everything. But the operation had been compromised. People died. Good people. The money became evidence of a crime we couldn't prosecute without exposing the operation itself. So we did the only thing we could. We hid it, made it disappear, sealed it away until the political climate changed, until we could safely bring it to light. That never happened. The people who knew about this cash died, were killed, or simply ran out of time. I'm the last one, and I'm out of time too. If you found this, it's yours, but understand what you're taking on. Powerful people wanted this buried. They might still. Be careful who you trust. Be careful who you tell. This money has blood on it, a lot of blood. Do with it what you will. But know that good men died to keep it from falling into the wrong hands. Don't let their sacrifice be for nothing." R.H., December 1973. Marcus read the letter twice, then a third time. His mind struggled to process the implications. A crashed military transport, a classified operation, a cover-up. And now, 50 years later, he was sitting in the middle of it. What happens next will turn this night upside down, reveal a truth nobody expected, and remind us why sometimes the quietest voices carry the most power. Stay tuned to see what happens next. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. He looked around the chamber again, at the crates, at the fortune surrounding him. This wasn't just money. This was evidence. This was history. This was something that people had killed to protect, and others had died trying to expose. And now it was his problem. Marcus carefully refolded the letter and placed it back in the case. His mind raced through possibilities. He could take some of it, enough to change his life, and leave the rest. He could report it to the authorities, though the letter suggested that might be dangerous. He could walk away entirely, close the hatch, and pretend he'd never seen any of this. But even as he thought it, he knew he couldn't. Because for the first time in 7 years, since Sarah and Emma died, he felt something other than numbness. He felt alive, scared, confused, overwhelmed, but alive. The storm outside continued its assault. Marcus climbed back up the stairs and closed the trapdoor carefully, making sure it settled flush with the floor. He dragged the cot back over it, covering any evidence that he'd found it. Then he returned to the fire, added more wood, and sat down to think. The cabin suddenly felt different. Not just a shelter from a storm, but a vault. A secret that had kept itself for over 50 years. And now that secret belonged to him, whether he wanted it or not. He pulled out the photograph he'd found earlier, the one showing the 2 men in front of the cabin. One of them had to be R.H., the man who'd written the letter. The man who'd stayed behind to guard this cache until he couldn't anymore. Marcus wondered what happened to him. Did he die up here, alone in this cabin? Or did he make it out, taking his secret with him? Outside, the wind howled. Inside, the fire crackled. And beneath the floor, frozen in stone and silence, $285 million waited for a decision that would change everything. Marcus stared into the flames, his mind turning over the impossible reality of his situation. He'd come into these mountains to escape life, to avoid complications, to exist in simple survival. Now he sat atop a fortune, in a cabin that shouldn't exist, with questions that had no easy answers and choices that would define whatever came next. The storm would end eventually. He would have to leave, and when he did, he would have to decide. Walk away, or carry the weight of what he'd found. Neither option felt right. Neither felt safe. But one thing was certain. His life of quiet isolation, of running from pain, of hiding in the mountains, was over. The moment he broke through that door, the moment he descended those stairs, everything changed. He just didn't know yet whether it had changed for better or worse. Marcus woke to the sound of violence. The storm hadn't eased. If anything, it had intensified. Wind hammered the cabin walls with fists of snow and ice, and the entire structure groaned like something alive and suffering. Grey morning light filtered through the filthy windows, barely enough to see by. He'd kept the fire going through the night, feeding it in half-sleep, and now it crackled weakly, hungry for more wood. He sat up, every muscle in his body protesting. The cold had worked its way deep into his joints overnight, despite the fire. His breath clouded in front of his face. The temperature inside the cabin couldn't be much above freezing. Outside, through the window, he saw nothing but white chaos. The world had been erased. Marcus stood slowly, wrapping himself in his mostly dry jacket. He moved to the door and tried to open it. It wouldn't budge. Snow had drifted against it during the night, sealing him in. He put his shoulder to it and pushed hard. The door moved an inch, then two, then stuck fast. Through the gap, he could see snow piled nearly 3 feet high. The storm showed no signs of stopping. He was trapped, maybe for days. The realization settled over him with surprising calm. He'd been in worse situations. At least he had shelter, fire, and now that he thought about it, he had something else too. He had time. Time to think. Time to explore. Time to understand exactly what he'd stumbled into last night. Marcus added wood to the fire and warmed his hands. Then he pulled out the photograph again, studying the 2 men standing in front of this cabin. They looked capable, serious, military, men with a mission. He flipped it over and read the pencil inscription again. November 72. Final supply run, final supply run. That phrase bothered him. It suggested an end to something, a closing of operations. But what operations? And why here? He set the photo down and began a systematic search of the cabin, this time in daylight, this time methodical. He started with the shelves, removing each item, examining it, setting it aside. Most of the canned goods were from the early 1970s. Beans, soup, vegetables, all preserved in metal containers that had rusted on the outside but might still be sealed inside. He found coffee in a tin, sugar in a jar, salt, flour, dried meat wrapped in paper that crumbled at his touch. Whoever had stocked this place had planned for a long stay, or many short stays. Behind the cans, pushed to the back of the top shelf, Marcus found something that made him pause. A radio. Military issue, he guessed, though he knew little about such things. It was compact, olive green, with dials and switches labeled in abbreviations he didn't recognize. He pulled it down carefully and examined it. The battery compartment was empty, corroded. Even if he had batteries, he doubted it would work after 50 years. But why would someone need a radio up here? Who were they communicating with? He set the radio aside and continued his search. The journal he'd found last night yielded more details in the daylight. He sat by the fire and read through it carefully, entry by entry. January 15th, 1972. Arrived at Site 0600, weather clear, cash secured, no signs of compromise. February 3rd. Supply run completed, additional materials stored, perimeter remains undisturbed. March 21st. Heavy snow, impassable for 2 weeks, food stores adequate, awaiting further instructions. The entries continued in this vein, sparse and factual, until October. Then something changed. The handwriting became less precise, more hurried. October 7th. Received final communication. Operation terminated effective immediately. Orders to secure site and extract. Russell refuses. Says someone needs to stay. Someone needs to guard it. October 14th. Russell stayed. I'm the last one out. God help him up here alone, but he's right. Someone has to. Too much at stake. The entries ended there. No signature, no name. Just dates and observations and one man's decision to abandon another to the mountains. Marcus closed the journal and stared into the fire. Russell. That had to be R.H., the man who'd written the letter in the cellar. The man who'd stayed behind to guard whatever was hidden beneath this cabin. But for how long? Days? Months? Years? He stood and moved back to the cot, dragging it away from the wall. The trap door was exactly where he'd left it, invisible unless you knew where to look. He knelt beside it and worked his fingers into the seam. The door lifted with less resistance this time, as if the wood had loosened overnight. Cold air rushed up from below, carrying that same metallic scent. Marcus descended the stairs slowly, his flashlight cutting through absolute darkness. At the bottom, he swept the beam across the chamber. Everything was as he'd left it. Crates stacked against the walls, the metal case with its documents, and the cold, so intense it made his teeth ache. But now, in the thin light of morning filtering down the stairwell, he could see more details. The chamber wasn't just a natural cave. It had been excavated, expanded, shaped. Tool marks scored the walls. Support beams had been installed overhead. This had taken time, effort, planning. Someone had engineered this space specifically for long-term storage in sub-zero temperatures. Marcus moved to the nearest crate and opened it again. The bundles of $100 bills stared back at him, each band marked $10,000. He pulled one out and examined it in the flashlight beam. The bills were old, from the 1960s and 70s, but pristine, uncirculated. The serial numbers were sequential. He set the bundle down and opened another crate. More money, but different denominations this time. 50s and 20s, also in sequential serial numbers, also uncirculated. Another crate held coins. Silver dollars from the 1800s, gold double eagles, rare mint marks. He knew enough about coins to recognize that some of these were worth far more than their face value. But it was the next crate that made him stop breathing. Gold bars. Each one about the size of a brick, stamped with official seals. United States Treasury. Weight, 400 troy ounces. Purity, 999.9, and below that, a date, 1971. Marcus lifted one. It was shockingly heavy, maybe 27 pounds. He ran his thumb across the smooth surface, feeling the cold metal, the reality of it. This wasn't cash that could deteriorate. This was pure wealth, unchanged by time. He counted the bars in the crate, 20 of them. At current gold prices, he tried to remember what gold was worth, maybe $1,900 an ounce. Each bar would be worth over $700,000, times 20. That was $14 million, in one crate. And there were at least 20 more crates in the chamber. Marcus set the gold bar down carefully and stepped back. His hands were shaking, and not from the cold. This was real. This was actually real. Hundreds of millions of dollars, sitting in a frozen chamber beneath an abandoned cabin that nobody knew existed. He forced himself to keep searching, to document what was here. The next several crates held more currency, some of it foreign. Swiss francs, German marks, British pounds, all from the early 70s. Another held bearer bonds, official certificates that could be cashed by whoever held them, no questions asked. Each one was worth $100,000. He counted 50 of them. 5 million in one small crate. Then he found the gemstones. 3 wooden boxes, each lined with velvet, each divided into small compartments. Diamonds, mostly, ranging from tiny stones to several that were easily 5 carats. But also rubies, emeralds, sapphires, all loose, all carefully wrapped. He knew nothing about gemstones, but even to his untrained eye, these looked exceptional, clear, perfectly cut, flawless. Marcus sat down on a crate and tried to process what he was seeing. This wasn't just a fortune. This was a carefully assembled collection of portable wealth. Cash, gold, bonds, gems, all things that could be moved, hidden, or converted quickly. This wasn't someone's life savings. This was something else entirely. He returned to the metal case and pulled out the other documents. Beneath the letter were photographs, dozens of them. Most showed mountains, wilderness, terrain that looked similar to where he was now. Some showed aircraft wreckage, twisted metal scattered across a snowfield. Others showed men in military uniforms, some in winter gear, others in dress uniforms with ranks and ribbons Marcus didn't recognize. One photograph made him pause. It showed a C-130 cargo plane on a runway, its rear ramp down, men loading wooden crates. The crates looked identical to the ones surrounding him now. On the back of the photo, someone had written, "Final Transport, January 71, Operation Coldfall, Operation Coldfall." Marcus had never heard of it. But then, if it was classified, if it had been covered up, why would he have? He found a manifest next, typed on military letterhead dated January 23, 1971. It listed cargo for a C-130 transport, 28 crates, contents classified, destination classified, authorization level, eyes only. The bottom of the page bore several signatures, but they'd been blacked out with heavy marker. Marcus kept digging. He found more documents, some heavily redacted, others pristine. Reports about a transport mission through mountain terrain during a winter storm. Weather analyses showing dangerous conditions. Flight plans that routed through the Rockies. And then, dated February 7, 1971, an official accident report. C-130 transport lost in mountain terrain. Weather-related crash. No survivors. Wreckage unrecoverable due to avalanche danger. Assets declared total loss. But that was a lie. Marcus was sitting in a room full of those assets. They hadn't been lost. They'd been recovered and hidden. He found the final piece of the puzzle in a leather folder tucked beneath everything else. Inside were newspaper clippings, yellowed and brittle with age. The headlines screamed from different papers, different dates, all from February 1971. Military transport crashes in Rockies, 8 dead. Cargo plane lost in storm, search suspended. Treasury Department confirms loss of classified shipment. Marcus read through the articles carefully. The official story was consistent. A C-130 carrying 8 crew members and classified cargo had gone down during a severe winter storm. The crash site had been located but deemed too dangerous to access due to avalanche risk. All crew members were presumed dead. The cargo was listed as classified equipment, total loss estimated at $30 million. $30 million. That was the official number. But sitting in this chamber, Marcus could see it was a fraction of the truth. This cash was worth 10 times that, maybe more. Someone had lied about how much was on that plane, or someone had recovered far more than they'd reported. He dug deeper into the folder and found a handwritten note, undated, unsigned. Transport went down as planned. Crew eliminated. Recovery team extracted cash to secure site. Official story holding. Operation Coldfall closed. All personnel reassigned or retired. Site to remain sealed until further notice. Crew eliminated. The words made Marcus's stomach turn. This wasn't an accident. This was murder. 8 men had died, not in a crash, but because someone wanted this cargo hidden, wanted it buried so deep nobody would ever find it. And the men who'd done it, who'd recovered this fortune and sealed it away, where were they now? Dead? Retired? Still out there somewhere, wondering if their secret was safe. What happens next will shatter everything Marcus thought he knew, force him into an impossible choice, and prove that some secrets are kept with bullets, not silence. Stay tuned to see what happens next. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. Marcus sat in the frozen darkness, surrounded by blood money, and felt the weight of it crushing down on him. This wasn't just a discovery, this was evidence of a crime. Multiple crimes, murder, theft, conspiracy, and a cover-up that had lasted over 50 years. And now he knew about it, which made him dangerous to someone, somewhere. He gathered the documents carefully and returned them to the metal case. Then he stood and walked the perimeter of the chamber one more time, his flashlight beam sweeping across the crates. At the far end, behind the stacks, he noticed something he'd missed before, a darker shadow against the dark wall. Marcus squeezed between the crates and aimed his light at the shadow. It wasn't just darkness, it was a recess in the rock, a natural alcove about 6 feet deep and 4 feet wide. And inside it, partially covered by a tarp, was something that made his blood run cold. Bones, human remains. Marcus approached slowly, his heart hammering. The skeleton was mostly intact, lying on its side, curled slightly as if the person had died trying to stay warm. Scraps of clothing still clung to the bones, heavy wool, military issue. Near the skull lay a dog tag, tarnished but readable, Russell T. Henshaw, service number 347-62918. Blood type O positive, Russell. The man who'd stayed behind. The man who'd written the letter. He hadn't made it out. He'd died here, alone in this frozen chamber, guarding a secret that had killed 8 men and would eventually kill him too. Marcus knelt beside the remains, a wave of unexpected emotion washing over him. This man had been abandoned by his team, left to watch over stolen wealth in a mountain prison. How long had he survived? Weeks? Months? Had he known he was going to die? Had he accepted it as the price of loyalty, or had he realized too late that he'd been betrayed? Beside the body, Marcus found a small notebook, its cover stiff with cold and time. He opened it carefully. The pages were filled with writing, the same precise hand from the journal upstairs, but deteriorating toward the end, becoming shaky, barely legible. The first entries were practical. Inventory complete, cash secure, awaiting extraction. But as the dates progressed, the tone changed. No contact in 3 weeks, radio dead, starting to think they're not coming back. Then, been 2 months, food running low, down to the emergency rations. If anyone finds this, know that I stayed because someone had to, because 8 good men died for this, and I wasn't going to let their deaths mean nothing. The final entry, dated May 18th, 1972, was barely readable. Can't feel my hands anymore. Too weak to climb the stairs. I understand now. They were never coming back for me. I was the last loose end. But I won't let this fall into the wrong hands. I'll guard it until I can't anymore. May God forgive us all for what we did. Marcus closed the notebook, his eyes burning. Russell Henshaw had died believing he was protecting something important, something worth sacrificing for. But he'd really been left to die because he knew too much, because he'd been part of something too dangerous to let survive. And now Marcus was part of it too. He stood and backed away from the remains, his mind reeling. 8 men murdered in a fake crash. Russell Henshaw abandoned to freeze to death. A fortune stolen and hidden. A cover-up that had lasted over half a century. And all of it sitting beneath his feet. What was he supposed to do with this? Report it to the authorities? Which authorities? The letter had warned him. Powerful people wanted this buried. If he went to the wrong person, if he told the wrong agency, he might end up like Russell, or worse. But if he took it, if he tried to move even a fraction of this wealth, he'd be stealing evidence. He'd be complicit in the original crime. And he'd be putting a target on his back that would never go away. Marcus climbed the stairs slowly, each step heavier than the last. At the top, he closed the trapdoor and dragged the cot back over it. The cabin felt different now. Not a shelter, but a tomb. A memorial to betrayal and murder and secrets kept at any cost. He sat by the fire and stared at the flames. Outside, the storm continued to rage. He was trapped here with a fortune and a body and knowledge that could get him killed. The isolation he'd sought in these mountains suddenly felt like a trap. He'd spent 7 years running from pain, from memories, from life itself. Now life had found him in the most impossible way. He thought about Sarah and Emma, about the accident that had taken them, a moment of bad luck, a patch of black ice, a truck that couldn't stop in time, random, senseless, gone. But this wasn't random. This was deliberate. 9 men had died, not by accident, but by design. Their families had been lied to. Their deaths had been used to hide a crime, and the proof was sitting in a frozen cellar beneath his feet. What would Sarah have told him to do? She'd always been the moral compass in their marriage, the one who saw things in clear terms of right and wrong. She would have said to do the right thing, consequences be damned. But what was the right thing? Turn it over and risk being silenced? Take it and become what he'd always despised? Walk away and leave it buried with Russell's bones? Marcus pulled out Russell's final notebook and read through it again. Between the practical entries and the desperate final words, he found something else. A passage dated March 9th, 1972. Sometimes I think about what this money could do. Real good, I mean. Schools, hospitals, families who need it. But it's poison, built on lies and death. Maybe the best thing would be if it stayed buried forever. Maybe some things aren't meant to be found. Marcus closed the notebook and looked around the cabin. Russell had been right. This money was poison. Every dollar was stained with blood. 8 murdered crew members. Russell himself left to die, and probably others, people who'd gotten too close to the truth or asked too many questions. But it was also $285 million. Life-changing, world-changing. Money that could do extraordinary good if used right, or extraordinary harm if it fell into the wrong hands. He thought about his life, about the last 7 years of self-imposed exile. He'd been hiding, punishing himself for being alive when his family wasn't. But maybe this was a chance at something else. Not redemption. Nothing could bring Sarah and Emma back, but purpose. Maybe he could take this poisoned fortune and turn it into something that honored the dead instead of just adding to their number. Or maybe that was just rationalization. Maybe he was already falling into the same trap that had caught everyone else who'd touched this money. The trap of thinking he could control it, use it, master it, when really it would master him. Marcus stood and walked to the window. The storm still raged, but he thought he could see a slight lessening in the intensity. By tomorrow, maybe tomorrow night, it would pass. The drifts would settle. He could dig himself out. He could hike back to his cabin, back to his life of quiet isolation. And he could pretend he'd never found this place. Never opened that trap door. Never descended into the chamber. Never learned the truth about Operation Coldfall and the 9 men who'd died for it. But he knew he wouldn't. Couldn't. Because Russell Henshaw had spent his final months alone in this cabin, guarding a secret that killed him, and he deserved better than to be forgotten. The 8 crew members deserved better than to have their murders covered up forever. And Marcus, whether he wanted it or not, was now the only person alive who knew the truth. He returned to the fire and added more wood. The flames leapt higher, casting dancing shadows on the walls. In those shadows, Marcus could almost see them. The crew of the C-130, Russell Henshaw, all the ghosts of Operation Coldfall, watching him, waiting to see what he would do. Outside, the wind howled like voices calling through the storm. Inside, Marcus sat with the weight of the world on his shoulders and a choice that would define the rest of his life. He could walk away. He could take it all. Or he could do something else entirely, something that honored the dead and exposed the truth without getting himself killed in the process. But first, he had to survive the storm, had to make it out of this cabin alive. Because if the men who'd orchestrated Operation Coldfall were still out there, still protecting their secret, they'd do whatever it took to keep it buried. And Marcus Kane had just become the biggest threat to a secret that had already cost 9 lives. He settled in by the fire, Russell's notebook in his lap, and began to plan. Not for escape, that would come when the storm broke, but for what came after. For how to turn blood money into justice. For how to expose a 50-year-old murder without becoming its 10th victim. The storm raged. The fire burned, and in the frozen chamber beneath the cabin floor, $285 million waited for a decision that would change everything. The storm broke on the 3rd day. Marcus woke to silence so profound it felt unnatural after 72 hours of relentless wind. He stood and moved to the window. Sunlight, brilliant and blinding, reflected off fresh snow that had transformed the landscape into something alien and beautiful. Drifts rose 15 feet high in places. Trees bent under the weight of ice, and the sky, impossibly blue, stretched endlessly overhead. He was free to leave. Finally. But as he stood there, staring out at the crystalline world, Marcus realized he wasn't the same man who'd stumbled into this cabin 3 days ago. That man had been running from life, hiding from pain, content to exist in isolation. This man, the one who'd spent 3 days with $285 million and a corpse, had questions that demanded answers and a choice that wouldn't let him rest. Marcus spent the morning preparing. He repacked his gear, doused the fire, and erased as much evidence of his stay as possible. Then he descended into the chamber one final time. He stood before Russell Henshaw's remains and spoke quietly, the first words he'd said aloud in days. "I don't know what I'm going to do yet, but I promise you this, your story won't stay buried. The men who died on that plane, they'll be remembered, and the ones who killed them, they'll answer for it. Somehow." He took photographs of everything. The crates, the documents, the remains, the chamber itself. His phone had no signal, but the camera still worked. Evidence, proof, insurance. Before leaving, Marcus took one bundle of $100 bills, $10,000, and tucked it deep in his pack. Not to spend, not yet, but as a physical reminder that this was real, that he hadn't imagined it. And maybe, if things went wrong, as emergency funds to disappear. He sealed the trapdoor, repositioned the cot, and took one last look around the cabin. Then he forced open the door, climbed through the snowdrift, and began the long trek home. The journey took 2 days. The snow was waist-deep in places, and he had to navigate around avalanche zones and impassable drifts. But Marcus knew these mountains. He'd spent 7 years learning every ridge and valley, every safe passage and dangerous slope. The wilderness that had nearly killed him now carried him home. His cabin sat exactly as he'd left it, dark and silent, buried under snow but intact. He dug out the door, stumbled inside, and collapsed on his bed. He slept for 16 hours straight, dreamless and deep, the sleep of someone who'd used every ounce of strength just to survive. When he woke, it was night. Marcus lit the fire, made coffee, and sat at his small wooden table with his laptop. The internet connection was satellite-based, expensive and slow, but functional. He opened a browser and began to search. Operation Coldfall. Nothing. Not a single result. He tried variations. Coldfall Military, Coldfall 1971, Operation Coldfall Classified. Nothing. The operation didn't exist, at least not in any public record. He shifted tactics. C-130 crash, 1971 Rockies. That returned results. Dozens of them. News articles, aviation safety reports, military records. He read through them systematically, taking notes. On February 7, 1971, a C-130 Hercules transport aircraft departed from an undisclosed military base, bound for another undisclosed location. Aboard were 8 crew members and classified cargo listed as sensitive equipment. The plane encountered severe weather crossing the Rocky Mountains and went down somewhere in the Colorado high country. Search and rescue teams located the crash site 6 days later, but determined it was too dangerous to attempt recovery due to avalanche risk. All crew members were declared dead. The cargo was classified as a total loss, valued officially at $30 million. Marcus cross-referenced the crew names from the articles with the documents he'd photographed in the cabin. They matched. 8 men. Captain James Whitmore, First Lieutenant Robert Chen, Technical Sergeant David Morrison, Staff Sergeant Michael Torres, Sergeant First Class William Hayes, Specialist Thomas Reed, Specialist Kevin Sullivan, and Airman First Class Anthony Greco, ages ranging from 22 to 38. All declared killed in action, casualties of a training accident. But it wasn't an accident. The note in the cabin had made that clear. Crew eliminated. These men had been murdered, and their deaths had been staged to look like a weather-related crash. Marcus searched for the families. That took longer, required more creative searching, but eventually he found them. Obituaries, memorial pages, scattered references in military family forums. Most of the crew had been married. Several had children. He found a memorial website maintained by Captain Whitmore's daughter, now in her 50s. She'd posted photos, memories, and a note. "My father died serving his country. We never got to say goodbye. We never even got to bury him. The government said the crash site was too dangerous. 53 years later, it still hurts." Marcus's throat tightened. These families had spent half a century grieving men who'd been murdered, never knowing the truth. Their loved ones weren't heroes who died in a tragic accident. They were victims of a conspiracy, killed to protect a secret. He kept digging. The cargo itself was harder to trace. Official records listed it as classified equipment, with no further details. But Marcus had seen it. Currency, gold, bonds, gemstones. That wasn't equipment. That was wealth, portable and untraceable. He expanded his search. 1971. What was happening then? Vietnam War still raging, Cold War tensions, political upheaval at home, and something else, something he'd almost forgotten. The gold standard. In August 1971, President Nixon had ended the dollar's convertibility to gold, effectively ending the Bretton Woods system. The decision had sent shockwaves through the global economy. But before that decision, in the months leading up to it, there had been massive movements of gold reserves, foreign governments trying to exchange their dollars for gold before the window closed. Marcus leaned back, thinking, what if that cargo hadn't been stolen? What if it had been official, a legitimate shipment of gold and currency being moved for reasons related to the gold standard crisis? And what if someone had seen an opportunity, staged a crash, and made off with a fortune that the government couldn't officially acknowledge because admitting its existence would cause a diplomatic nightmare? It was speculation, but it fit. It explained the classified nature of the cargo, the cover-up, the willingness to kill 8 men and abandon a 9th to die. This wasn't just theft, this was treason on a scale that could have destabilized international relations. Marcus spent 3 more days researching, barely sleeping, consuming coffee and canned soup, filling a notebook with names, dates, connections. He learned that all the surviving members of the search and rescue team that had supposedly located the crash site had either died or disappeared within 10 years of the incident. He found references to a Senate investigation in 1974 into irregularities in military cargo transport procedures that had been abruptly closed with all records sealed. And he found one more thing. A conspiracy theory website, poorly designed and last updated 2 years ago, maintained by someone who signed their posts as Truth Seeker 44. The site was dedicated to unsolved military mysteries, and one entire section focused on the C-130 crash of 1971. Truth Seeker 44 had compiled an impressive amount of information. Crew backgrounds, inconsistencies in the official reports, weather data that contradicted the military's timeline, and testimony from a retired air traffic controller who claimed the plane's last known position was nowhere near the official crash site. The most recent post, dated November 2023, read, "I've spent 30 years researching this case. I know what was on that plane. I know why it went down. And I know someone recovered the cargo. If you have information, contact me. The families deserve the truth." Marcus stared at the screen for a long time. Then he did something he immediately regretted. He sent an email through the site's contact form. "I may have information about the 1971 C-130 incident. Need to verify your credibility before sharing details. What evidence do you have that the cargo was recovered?" He hit send before he could talk himself out of it. The reply came 6 hours later, in the middle of the night. Marcus's laptop chimed, startling him awake. He opened the email. "You found it, didn't you? The cache. Jesus Christ, after all these years, we need to meet, face to face. I have documents you'll want to see, and you have proof I've been searching for since 1991. I'm in Denver. Name the place. I'll be there. And for God's sake, be careful. If you found it, others might know too. They've been watching for a long time. DM." Marcus's blood ran cold. He read the email 3 times, paranoia creeping up his spine. How did this person know he'd found it? He'd been deliberately vague in his message, unless they were already watching, unless they knew more than they should. He closed the laptop and stood, moving to the window. Outside, darkness pressed against the glass. The forest beyond was silent, empty. Or was it? For the first time since returning home, Marcus felt exposed. His cabin sat isolated, yes, but that meant no witnesses, no help. If someone wanted to make him disappear, this would be the perfect place. He checked his rifle, loaded it, and spent the rest of the night watching the tree line, jumping at every sound. Morning brought no relief, only exhaustion and mounting dread. Marcus hadn't responded to the email, but that didn't matter. He'd made contact. He'd announced himself. And now someone knew. The first sign came that afternoon. Marcus went outside to split wood and noticed something odd. Tracks in the snow near the edge of his property. Boot prints recent, maybe from last night. They approached to within 50 yards of his cabin, stopped, then retreated back into the forest. Someone had been watching him. His hands shook as he followed the tracks. They led to a clearing about 100 yards away, where the snow had been trampled by someone standing for a long time. From this vantage point, they would have had a clear view of his cabin, his movements, everything. On a tree branch at eye level, Marcus found something that made his heart stop. A small piece of orange surveyor's tape tied deliberately. A marker. A message. "We know where you are." He returned to the cabin, locked the door, and tried to think rationally. Who were they? Government agents protecting a 50-year-old secret? Descendants of the men who'd orchestrated the theft? Someone else who'd been searching for the cash? Marcus pulled out his phone and stared at it. He needed help, but who could he trust? Local law enforcement? They'd think he was crazy or call the feds, who might be compromised. A lawyer? That would create a paper trail. A friend? He had none, not anymore. 7 years of isolation had burned those bridges. He thought about the email from Truth Seeker 44, from DM. It could be a trap, or it could be exactly what it claimed. Someone who'd spent decades researching this case and genuinely wanted the truth. Marcus needed to know more before deciding. He opened his laptop and dove back into research, this time focusing on the conspiracy theorist. Cross-referencing the website's registration information with social media, he eventually found a name. Daniel Marks, 68 years old, retired journalist living in Denver. Marks had worked for the Associated Press in the 70s and 80s, covering military and defense issues. He'd written several articles about government cover-ups before leaving journalism in 1992. Marcus found an interview Marks had given to a podcast in 2020. "I got too close to something in 91, started asking questions about a plane crash from 71. Next thing I know, my apartment's broken into, my files are stolen, and I'm being followed. I quit the AP, went quiet for a while, but I never stopped digging. Some stories are too important to let die." It could still be a trap, but Marks's history seemed legitimate. And more importantly, Marcus needed allies. He couldn't do this alone. He composed a careful response. "I need proof you are who you claim. Tell me something about the crash that isn't public knowledge. Something that would confirm you've seen classified information." The reply came within an hour. The official cargo manifest listed $30 million in equipment, real cargo, $230 million in gold bullion and currency, plus bearer bonds, being moved as part of emergency financial operations related to the impending end of the gold standard. Shipment was authorized by a task force that included Treasury, Defense, and CIA. After the crash, an internal audit found discrepancies but was suppressed. 3 auditors died in unrelated accidents within 6 months. That specific enough for you? Marcus stared at the screen. The number was close to what he'd estimated, if not exact. And the context, emergency financial operations, the gold standard, matched his theory. Marks either had access to classified information, or he'd stumbled onto the truth the same way Marcus had. He typed, "When and where?" "Durango, Public Library. 3 days from now, 2 p.m. Come alone. Bring proof, but not the physical items. Photos, documents, anything digital. And watch your back. If you found the cash, others might be looking too." Marcus confirmed the meeting and closed his laptop. 3 days. That gave him time to prepare, to think, to decide if he was really going to do this. But even as he thought about backing out, he knew he wouldn't. He'd crossed a line the moment he'd contacted Marks. There was no going back now. That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. Every sound made him reach for his rifle. Every shadow outside the window looked like a person. He'd lived in these mountains for 7 years without fear, but now his sanctuary felt like a trap. At 2 in the morning, he heard it. The crunch of snow outside. Footsteps, deliberate and close. Marcus grabbed his rifle and moved to the window. In the moonlight, he saw a figure standing at the edge of the clearing, watching, just standing there, watching his cabin. Marcus's finger moved to the trigger. Then the figure turned and walked away, disappearing into the trees. Not running, not hiding, just leaving. As if they wanted him to know they'd been there. He found the note at dawn, tucked under a rock near his front door. Plain white paper, typed message. You have something that doesn't belong to you. Return it to where you found it and walk away. This is your only warning. Marcus crumpled the note, fury overriding fear. Someone was threatening him for discovering evidence of murder, for finding proof of a conspiracy, for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. And they expected him to just comply, to quietly put everything back and forget what he'd seen. That note made his decision easier. He wasn't going to walk away. He wasn't going to let Russell Henshaw's death be meaningless or let 8 murdered men stay forgotten. He was going to expose this, consequences be damned. But first, he needed to survive long enough to do it. Marcus spent the next 2 days preparing. He made copies of everything, all the photos, documents, his notes, and stored them in multiple locations. Encrypted cloud storage, a safe deposit box in town, and with his lawyer in Durango with instructions to open it if anything happened to him. He wrote a detailed account of everything he'd found and seen, sealed it in an envelope, and mailed it to himself at a post office box in another state. He also prepared for the possibility that someone might try to stop him from reaching Durango. He planned 3 different routes, packed survival gear, and made sure his truck was fueled and ready. If someone was watching, they'd expect him to take the main highway. He'd go overland instead, using old logging roads and Forest Service trails he'd learned over the years. On the morning of the 3rd day, Marcus locked his cabin and started driving. He took a winding route through the mountains, doubling back several times, watching for vehicles following him. He saw nothing suspicious, but that didn't mean he was alone. Durango was a 3-hour drive that took him 5. He arrived early, spent an hour driving around, checking for surveillance. The town looked normal. Tourists, locals, the usual rhythm of mountain life. He parked 2 blocks from the library and walked, keeping his head down, trying to look like just another person running errands. The library was a modern building, glass and steel, busy with afternoon patrons. Marcus found a table in the back corner where he could watch the entrance. 2 p.m. came and went. No one approached. Marcus waited, tension coiling in his stomach. At 2:15, a man walked in. Late 60s, grey hair pulled back in a ponytail, wearing jeans and a faded denim jacket. He carried a worn leather satchel and moved with the careful deliberation of someone who'd learned to be cautious. His eyes swept the library, found Marcus, and held his gaze for a moment. Then he walked over. "You look like someone who's seen a ghost," the man said quietly, sitting down without invitation. "Daniel Marks?" "Call me Danny. And you are?" "Marcus Kane." Danny studied him for a long moment. "You really found it? The cache?" Marcus nodded slowly. "Cliff cabin, about 40 miles northeast of here. Hidden cellar, frozen solid. Everything you said was there, plus more." Danny's eyes widened. "Christ, after all these years." He pulled out a tablet from his satchel and opened it. "Show me." Marcus hesitated, then pulled out his phone. He'd selected a dozen photos, enough to prove what he'd found, but not enough to reveal the exact location. Danny scrolled through them, his face pale, hands trembling slightly. "That's it," he whispered. "That's the cargo. Look at those serial numbers on the currency. Those match the treasury records I got from a source in '89. He looked up at Marcus. "Do you understand what you've found? Blood money, evidence of murder, treason." "All of that," Danny agreed. "But also justice. Maybe, if we handle this right." He leaned forward. "I've been investigating this for 33 years. Started when I was covering military affairs for the AP. Got a tip from a source that the '71 crash wasn't what it seemed. The more I dug, the more dangerous it became. People warned me off. Files disappeared. Sources died. I almost died twice. Once in a car accident that shouldn't have happened. Once when my house burned down while I was sleeping. Only survived because my dog woke me up." "Who's behind it?" Danny shook his head. That's what I've never been able to prove. The operation was compartmentalized. Different people knew different pieces, but nobody knew everything except maybe a handful at the very top. And they're all dead now. At least I think they are. Then who left me the warning? Who's been watching my cabin? Danny's expression darkened. Could be true believers, people who were part of the original operation or their descendants, still protecting the secret. Could be someone new who's been searching for the cash, or... He paused. Could be current government assets who monitor for signs that old secrets are surfacing. Marcus felt sick. What do I do? We expose it, Danny said simply, but carefully. We need irrefutable proof, multiple witnesses, and a strategy that prevents anyone from making us disappear before the truth comes out. How? Danny pulled out a folder from his satchel. Inside were documents, photos, handwritten notes. I've built relationships over the years. Retired agents who had doubts about the official story. Historians who've studied Cold War financial operations. Journalists at major outlets who'd kill for a story this big. What I've never had is physical proof. You have that now. Marcus stared at the folder. The families, the Cruz families, they deserve to know the truth. They do, Danny agreed. And they will. But first, we need to make sure we survive to tell them. They spent the next 3 hours planning. Danny had contacts at the Treasury Department, the FBI's Cold Case Division, and the National Archives. He knew historians who specialized in classified operations and journalists who'd broken major corruption stories. The strategy was simple. Document everything, verify it through multiple sources, then release it simultaneously to multiple outlets with full legal protection in place. We go big, Danny explained. Not just a news article, a documentary, a book, congressional testimony. We make it so public, so verified, so undeniable that no one can suppress it. And we do it fast, before they figure out how to stop us. Marcus nodded, but his mind was on something else. There's a body in the cellar, Russell Henshaw. He was part of the team that hid the cash. They left him there to die. Danny's jaw tightened. Then we bring him home too. He deserves a proper burial, and his death is evidence of conspiracy to commit murder. As they prepared to leave, Danny placed a hand on Marcus's arm. You need to understand something. From this moment on, your life is different. You're not just a witness anymore. You're a target. They'll try to discredit you, intimidate you, maybe worse. Are you ready for that? Marcus thought about the orange tape on the tree, the note under the rock, the figure watching his cabin in the night. He thought about Russell Henshaw dying alone in the dark, about 8 men murdered and their families lied to for 53 years. He thought about Sarah and Emma, about how random tragedy had stolen them, and how he'd spent 7 years hiding from the pain instead of living through it. I'm ready, he said. They exchanged contact information and agreed to communicate only through encrypted channels. Danny would start reaching out to his sources. Marcus would return to the cabin, secure the site, and prepare for what came next. As Marcus walked back to his truck, he felt eyes on him. He turned, scanning the street. Nothing obvious, but he knew they were there, watching, waiting, trying to decide what to do about the man who'd found their secret. Let them watch, Marcus thought. The truth was coming, and there was nothing they could do to stop it now. The storm had cleared. The path forward was dangerous but necessary, and for the first time in 7 years, Marcus Kane felt truly alive. The federal agents arrived at Marcus's cabin 3 days after his meeting with Danny Marks. 2 black SUVs rolling up the mountain road, unmarked but unmistakable. Marcus watched them from his window, rifle within reach but not in hand. This was the moment. Either the beginning of justice or the end of everything. The lead agent was a woman in her 40s, dark hair pulled back severely, eyes that had seen too much and believed too little. She introduced herself as Special Agent Catherine Reeves, FBI Cold Case Division. Her partner was Agent Thomas Lynn, younger, quieter, carrying a briefcase that looked heavy with documents. Mr. Kane, Reeves said, standing on his porch in the cold morning air. "We understand you've made a significant discovery related to a 1971 military transport incident. We'd like to discuss it." Marcus had prepared for this conversation, rehearsed it with Danny, but his mouth still went dry. "How did you know?" "Daniel Marks contacted us," Reeves said. "He's a known researcher, has connections in our division. When he said he had a credible witness to Operation Coldfall, we listened." She paused. "May we come in?" Marcus stepped aside. The cabin suddenly felt very small with 4 people inside. Reeves and Lynn sat at his table while Marcus stood by the fireplace, arms crossed, defensive. "Tell us what you found," Reeves said, pulling out a recording device. "Everything. From the beginning." So Marcus did. He told them about the storm, the cabin, the hidden cellar. He showed them the photographs, the documents he'd copied, Russell Henshaw's final journal entries. He told them about the body, the cash, the $285 million frozen beneath the mountain. He left nothing out. When he finished, Reeves and Lynn exchanged a long look. Lynn opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick file. "Operation Coldfall," he said, laying it on the table. "Classified until 2016, when it was partially declassified due to a Freedom of Information Act request. Most of it is still redacted, but what we know matches your story." He pulled out documents, laying them side by side with Marcus's photos. The C-130 crash was real, but it wasn't an accident. The plane was carrying currency and gold being secretly relocated due to the 1971 gold standard crisis. Someone inside the operation betrayed it. The plane went down. Recovery teams were sent in, but they were compromised. The cargo disappeared. 8 crew members died. A 9th man, Russell Henshaw, was left at a secure site to guard the recovered assets. He was supposed to be extracted within a week. That extraction never came. "Why?" Marcus asked, though he already knew. "Because the people at the top decided the scandal of losing that much money was worse than the scandal of the crash itself," Reeves said bluntly. "They covered it up, declared the cargo a total loss, let Henshaw die, and sealed the files for 50 years, hoping everyone involved would be dead before the truth came out." "And the men who did it?" Reeves shook her head. "Most are dead. The few who might still be alive are in their 80s or 90s, many with dementia or in nursing homes. But the conspiracy itself, the institution that allowed it to happen, that's what we're after now." Marcus leaned against the wall, processing. "What happens to the money?" "That's complicated," Lynn said. "Technically, it's government property. Currency that was never reported stolen, gold that's still on the books as lost. But there are laws about finder's fees, about historical discoveries. You could be entitled to a significant percentage." "How significant?" 10 to 20%, Reeves said. "Could be more, depending on how the courts rule. We're talking $28 to $57 million, Mr. Kane. Life-changing money." Marcus sat down heavily. The numbers were abstract, impossible to grasp. A week ago, he'd been living on trapped pelts and vegetable soup. Now agents were talking about $50 million like it was a math problem. "What do I have to do?" "Lead us to the site," Reeves said. "Show us everything. Let us document it, secure it, and begin the process of recovery. Then you testify. Congressional hearings, probably. Depositions for the families who are filing wrongful death suits. Media interviews. It's going to be intense, Mr. Kane. Your life won't be private anymore." Marcus thought about the figure watching his cabin, the note under the rock, the orange tape. "Someone's already threatened me. Told me to put everything back and walk away." Reeves's expression hardened. "We'll provide protection. Round-the-clock surveillance once this goes public. But I won't lie to you. There's risk. Some secrets are kept because people are willing to kill for them." "The families," Marcus said. "The crew's families. They need to know first, before it hits the news, before it becomes a spectacle. They deserve that." Reeves nodded. "Agreed. We'll coordinate with them. Some have been waiting over 50 years for answers. This will be hard for them, but it's also closure." Marcus stood and walked to the window. Outside, snow covered everything, clean and white and peaceful. His sanctuary, his hiding place. For 7 years he'd lived here, running from the pain of losing Sarah and Emma, avoiding connection, avoiding life. Now life had found him in the most impossible way, and he couldn't run anymore. "When do we go?" he asked. "Tomorrow," Reeves said. "Assemble a full recovery team, forensics, treasury agents, military liaisons. This is going to be the biggest cold case recovery in FBI history, and you, Mr. Kane, are going to be at the center of it." The operation took 3 weeks. Marcus led a team of 30 federal agents, forensic specialists, and military personnel back to the cliff cabin. They hiked in with equipment, generators, and enough supplies for an extended stay. The cabin, that lonely structure that had saved Marcus's life and changed everything, became a command center. Marcus watched as they descended into the cellar, documenting every crate, every bundle of cash, every gold bar. Forensic teams carefully excavated Russell Henshaw's remains, treating them with the respect of a fallen soldier finally coming home. Military historians photographed every detail. Treasury agents catalogued every dollar. And through it all, Marcus felt like a ghost, present but removed, watching his discovery become public property. Danny Marks was there too, invited by Reeves as a consultant. He'd spent 33 years chasing this story, and now he moved through the cabin with tears in his eyes, touching documents, whispering to himself, "It's real. It's all real. I wasn't crazy." On the 12th day, Agent Reeves pulled Marcus aside. "We've finished the preliminary count, $287,300,000 in total assets. Currency, gold, bonds, gems. You were remarkably accurate in your estimate." Marcus just nodded. The number meant nothing. It was too big, too abstract. "We've also identified something else," Reeves continued. She led him to a corner of the cellar where forensic teams had been working. "There's a false wall here. Behind it we found a smaller cache, personal items belonging to the original conspirators, letters, photographs, recordings, evidence they kept as insurance probably, proof of who gave the orders, who authorized the cover-up." She showed him a photograph. 5 men in suits sitting around a conference table. Behind them, a presidential seal. This was taken in January 1971, 6 weeks before the crash. That's the Secretary of Defense, the Director of CIA, Treasury Secretary, and 2 others we haven't identified yet. The back of the photo says, "Final Planning Session, Operation Coldfall." Marcus stared at the image. These were the men responsible. The ones who'd decided 8 lives were acceptable losses. The ones who'd left Russell Henshaw to die. And they documented it, kept proof, probably to protect themselves from each other. "These men," he said quietly, "most of them are dead." Secretary of Defense died in 89. CIA Director in 94. Treasury Secretary is still alive, 92 years old, in a memory care facility. The other 2, we're still confirming. Reeves paused. "But it doesn't matter if they're alive or dead. What matters is the truth comes out. The families get answers, and the system that allowed this to happen gets exposed." The story broke on a Tuesday in March. Danny Marks had coordinated with major news outlets, and the expose ran simultaneously across every major platform. The New York Times, the Washington Post, CNN, NPR, all led with the same story. 53-year cover-up, exposed, military transport, accident, was murder and theft. Marcus's face was everywhere. The mountain man who'd stumbled into history. The recluse who'd found $287 million and a conspiracy. Within hours, his name was trending on social media. News vans descended on his cabin. Helicopters flew overhead. His phone, which had barely rung in 7 years, exploded with calls from journalists, lawyers, movie producers, and people he'd gone to high school with claiming they'd always known he was special. It was overwhelming, terrifying, exhausting. The FBI moved him to a safe house in Denver while the media storm raged. For 3 weeks, Marcus lived in a sterile apartment with agents outside his door, watching his life play out on television. The families of the dead crew members gave tearful interviews. Historians analyzed the documents. Politicians called for investigations, and through it all, Marcus felt disconnected, like he was watching someone else's story. Danny Marks visited often, helping Marcus prepare for the inevitable interviews and testimony. "You're a hero," Danny said one evening, sitting across from Marcus in the apartment. "You exposed a massive conspiracy. You brought closure to families who'd waited over half a century. You did the right thing." "I stumbled into a cabin to avoid freezing to death," Marcus said flatly. "That's not heroic. That's lucky." "What you did after finding it, that was the choice," Danny insisted. "You could have taken the money and run. You could have stayed quiet. Instead, you risked your life to tell the truth. That's heroism." Marcus stared out the window at the Denver skyline. He didn't feel like a hero. He felt like a man who'd been running from pain for 7 years and had finally been forced to stop. The congressional hearings began in April. Marcus sat at a table in front of cameras and politicians, his hands sweating, his voice shaky at first, but growing stronger as he told his story. He described the storm, the cabin, the frozen cellar. He showed the photographs, read Russell Henshaw's final words, and answered questions for 8 hours straight. The room was silent when he finished, except for the sound of Captain Whitmore's daughter crying softly in the back row. She'd flown in from Ohio to hear the truth about her father's death. After the hearing, she approached Marcus, her face streaked with tears. "Thank you," she said, gripping his hands. "For 53 years, we thought he died in an accident. We thought he was a hero who sacrificed for his country. Now we know he was murdered, and that's harder. But at least it's the truth. At least we can stop wondering." Marcus hugged her, this stranger bound to him by tragedy, and for the first time since finding the cabin, he cried. Not for the money or the discovery, but for the weight of what it all meant. Lives destroyed, families broken, and all of it buried under lies for over half a century. The legal proceedings took 8 months. Lawyers argued about salvage rights, finder's fees, historical artifact laws, and government claims. Marcus barely understood most of it. He hired a team of attorneys on Danny's recommendation and let them handle the complexity. He just wanted it to be over. In November, almost a year after he'd stumbled into that cliff cabin, the court reached a decision. Marcus Kane was entitled to 18% of the recovered assets as a finder's fee, minus legal costs and taxes. The final amount, $42,700,000. Marcus sat in the courtroom and heard the number announced. 42 million. It was absurd. Impossible. More money than he could spend in 10 lifetimes. And yet, as he looked around the room at the families who'd lost loved ones, at Danny Marks, who'd spent 3 decades chasing truth, at Agent Reeves, who'd worked tirelessly to bring justice, he realized the money was the least important part of this story. The real discovery wasn't the fortune. It was what came after. Marcus didn't buy a mansion or a yacht or any of the things people imagined sudden wealth would bring. Instead, he did something else. He created a foundation, the Fallen 8 Memorial Fund, dedicated to honoring the 8 murdered crew members and supporting their descendants. $10 million went into an endowment that would provide scholarships for the children and grandchildren of Whitmore, Chen, Morrison, Torres, Hayes, Reed, Sullivan, and Greco. Every year, on February 7th, the anniversary of their deaths, the foundation would hold a memorial service at Arlington National Cemetery, where Russell Henshaw had finally been laid to rest alongside his fellow soldiers. Another $5 million went to search and rescue operations in the Rocky Mountains. Marcus had been saved by his knowledge of wilderness survival, but dozens of hikers died each year in these mountains. The fund would provide training, equipment, and support for rescue teams across Colorado, Wyoming, and Montana. $3 million went to veterans organizations, specifically programs supporting soldiers dealing with betrayal by their own government, moral injury, and institutional trauma. And $2 million went to preserving the cliff cabin itself. Working with the National Park Service and historical societies, Marcus helped turn the structure into a memorial site. Not a tourist trap, but a place of education and reflection. Visitors could see where Operation Coldfall's conspiracy had ended, where Russell Henshaw had died guarding a secret, where truth had finally emerged from frozen darkness. The rest of the money, after taxes and legal fees, Marcus kept. Not because he needed it, but because it represented a choice. The choice to stop running. The choice to rejoin life. The choice to believe that maybe, after 7 years of numbness, he could feel something again. The first call he made with his new resources was to his sister in Montana. They hadn't spoken in 5 years, not since she'd stopped trying to pull him out of his grief-induced isolation. The phone rang 4 times before she answered. "Caroline," Marcus said, his voice cracking. "It's me." Silence. Then, "Marcus? Oh my God, I've been seeing you on the news. Are you okay? Where are you?" "I'm okay," he said, "and I'm sorry for disappearing, for pushing you away, for making you watch me die slowly instead of letting you help me live." Caroline sobbed on the other end. "I've missed you so much. We all have. The kids ask about Uncle Marcus. They don't even remember you." "I want to change that," Marcus said, "if you'll let me." She flew to Denver 2 days later. They met at a coffee shop, awkward at first, 7 years of silence heavy between them. But slowly, haltingly, they began to rebuild. Marcus met his niece and nephew, now 11 and 9, who knew him only from photographs. He apologized to Caroline's husband for missing their wedding, their children's births, every holiday and milestone, and he made a promise. He was done hiding. Word spread through his small mountain community about Marcus's discovery. Some treated him like a celebrity, asking for selfies and autographs. Others resented him, claiming he'd brought unwanted attention to their quiet town. But most just welcomed him back, recognizing that he'd been lost and had somehow found his way home. Marcus used some of his money to help the town. The volunteer fire department got new equipment. The elementary school got a new library. The community center got renovations. He didn't do it for recognition. He insisted on anonymity, but people knew. And slowly, the man who'd lived as a hermit for 7 years became part of the community again. In February, on the first anniversary of his discovery, Marcus returned to the cliff cabin. It wasn't public yet, still undergoing renovation and historical preservation. But Agent Reeves arranged for him to visit privately, one last time before it became a memorial. He stood in the main room, now cleaned and stabilized, support beams added to keep the ceiling from collapsing. The fireplace where he'd built that life-saving fire had been restored. The shelves where he'd found Russell's journal were empty now, all artifacts removed to archives and museums. The trapdoor to the cellar remained, sealed behind plexiglass, visible but inaccessible. Marcus descended the stairs into the chamber one final time. It was empty now, all the crates removed, the space feeling larger and colder without its burden of secrets. But in the alcove where Russell Henshaw had died, someone had placed a bronze plaque. Russell Thomas Henshaw, Staff Sergeant, United States Army, born April 12, 1943, died May 18, 1972. He guarded this place alone, forgotten by those he served, until the truth finally set him free. His sacrifice will not be forgotten. Marcus stood before the plaque for a long time, his breath visible in the frozen air. Then he noticed something. A small envelope, weathered and old, tucked behind where Russell's body had been found. The forensic teams must have missed it, hidden in a crack in the rock. Marcus pulled it out carefully. The envelope was sealed, addressed in Russell's shaky final handwriting. "To whoever finds me." With trembling fingers, Marcus opened it. Inside was a single page, the last thing Russell Henshaw ever wrote. "If you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you found what I was protecting. I don't know how long I've been here. Weeks, maybe months. The cold makes it hard to think, hard to remember why I stayed. I stayed because someone had to. Because 8 good men died for this, and their deaths deserved to mean something more than just covering up a crime. I stayed because walking away would have made me part of the lie, and I couldn't do that, not after what we did. We were told this was about national security, about protecting sensitive financial operations during a crisis. We believed we were serving our country. Instead, we served greed. We murdered innocent men and called it necessary. I can never make that right, but I can guard this place. I can make sure that if someone ever finds the truth, it's all here. Every dollar, every piece of evidence, everything they tried to hide. I'm not a hero. I'm a man who helped commit terrible crimes and spent his last days trying to atone. I don't know if that's enough. I don't know if anything could be enough. But maybe someday, someone will find this. Someone will expose what happened. Someone will bring justice for the men we killed. And maybe then, I can finally rest. If that someone is you, thank you. For not turning away. For not letting them bury the truth with me. Russell Henshaw, May 1972. Marcus read the letter twice, tears streaming down his face. Russell hadn't been abandoned without knowing it. He'd known. He'd understood exactly what was happening. And he'd chosen to stay anyway, to turn his complicity into something meaningful, even if it cost him everything. Marcus carefully folded the letter and placed it in his jacket. This would go in the memorial, Russell's final testament. Not a confession, but a sacrifice. As Marcus climbed the stairs for the last time, he understood something he hadn't before. The real treasure he'd found in that cliff cabin wasn't the money. It was perspective. For 7 years, he'd been trapped by grief, convinced his pain was unique, that losing Sarah and Emma meant his life was over. But Russell had shown him something different. Loss doesn't have to mean the end. Sometimes it's just the beginning of something else. Something harder maybe, but also something meaningful. The memorial dedication took place in June. Hundreds of people attended. The families of the 8 murdered crew members, federal agents who'd worked the case, historians, veterans, and ordinary citizens who'd followed the story. The cliff cabin, now officially designated the Operation Coldfall Memorial Site, stood clean and preserved against the mountain cliff. Marcus gave a brief speech, his voice steady now, no longer that of a man hiding from life, but of someone who'd rejoined it. This place represents both the worst and best of humanity. The worst because of what happened here: betrayal, murder, conspiracy. The best because one man chose to stay, to guard the truth, even when it cost him everything. Russell Henshaw died alone in this cabin, but he didn't die forgotten. None of them did. And as long as this memorial stands, none of them ever will. The families wept. Strangers embraced. And Marcus felt something he hadn't felt since before the accident. Peace. Not happiness, not joy, but peace. The kind that comes from doing something right, something difficult, something that matters. Life returned to a new kind of normal over the following months. Marcus bought a small house in town. Nothing extravagant, just a place with heat that worked and neighbors close enough to talk to. He volunteered with the search and rescue team he'd funded, teaching wilderness survival to young people. He attended Caroline's family dinners every Sunday, watching his niece and nephew grow up, being present in their lives. He even dated a little, awkwardly at first, trying to remember how to connect with another person. A teacher named Beth, kind and patient, who didn't care about the money or the fame. She'd lost her husband to cancer 3 years earlier and understood grief's weight. They took it slow, coffee dates and hiking, neither rushing toward anything but both grateful not to be alone. Danny Marks won a Pulitzer Prize for his reporting on Operation Coldfall. He dedicated it to Marcus, saying in his acceptance speech, "This story took 33 years to tell because most people weren't brave enough to hear it. Marcus Kane was brave enough to tell it. This is his Pulitzer as much as mine." Agent Reeves was promoted to head the FBI's cold case division. She called Marcus occasionally, updating him on related investigations. The documents found in the cabin had led to 5 other cold cases being reopened. Justice was slow, but it was happening, and the families, the descendants of those 8 murdered men, found something they'd been missing for over 50 years. Closure. Not the kind that heals all wounds, but the kind that at least lets you understand why they hurt. One evening in October, almost 2 years after that storm had driven him into the cliff cabin, Marcus stood on his porch watching the sun set behind the mountains. The aspens were golden, their leaves shimmering in the fading light. The air smelled of wood smoke and coming winter. Beth stood beside him, her hand in his, neither of them speaking. They didn't need to. After everything Marcus had been through, the loss, the isolation, the discovery, the chaos. He'd learned that the most important things rarely needed words. His phone buzzed. A message from Caroline. Kids want to know if Uncle Marcus can come camping next weekend. They're learning about wilderness survival in Scouts and want to show off. Marcus smiled and typed back, "Wouldn't miss it." He put the phone away and looked out at the mountains, those ancient peaks that held so many secrets. He'd found one of them, exposed it, and somehow survived. But more importantly, he'd found something else. Not hidden in a frozen cellar or sealed behind a trap door, but buried inside himself, the will to live again. The money had changed his circumstances, yes. He'd never worry about bills or survival again. But the real change had nothing to do with $42 million. The real change was choosing to stop running from pain and start walking toward purpose. It was deciding that loss didn't have to define him forever, that he could honor Sarah and Emma by living fully instead of barely existing. Russell Henshaw had guarded a secret in a mountain cabin, alone in the cold, believing it mattered, and it had. But the greatest discovery wasn't what Russell had protected. It was what Marcus had learned from him, that redemption is always possible, even in the darkest places. That meaning can be found in the most unexpected moments, and that sometimes you have to lose everything to understand what truly matters. Marcus took a deep breath of mountain air and exhaled slowly. The storm that had driven him into that cabin felt like a lifetime ago. In some ways, it was. The man who'd stumbled through that door, half frozen and desperate, didn't exist anymore. He'd been replaced by someone else, someone who'd seen the depths of human corruption and the heights of human courage, someone who'd been given an impossible choice and made it anyway, someone who'd stopped hiding from life and started living it. Beth squeezed his hand. "What are you thinking about?" Marcus smiled. "How I ended up here. How a blizzard and a broken-down cabin led to all of this." "Do you regret it? Any of it?" He considered the question. The threats, the fear, the media circus, the legal battles, the weight of knowing 8 men had been murdered and 1 had died alone. All of it had been crushing at times, overwhelming and exhausting. But it had also cracked him open, forced him back into the world, given him purpose he thought he'd lost forever. "No," he said finally. "I don't regret it. I wish those men hadn't died. I wish Russell had been rescued. I wish the world was different. But I can't regret finding the truth, or what it cost me to tell it." Beth nodded. "You did something important. Most people will never have that kind of impact. Most people will never freeze to death in a blizzard and break into a random cabin," Marcus said with a slight laugh. "True," Beth agreed. "But most people also wouldn't have done what you did after. They would have taken the money and run, or stayed quiet to stay safe. You chose differently." Marcus thought about that. Choice. That's what it always came down to. Not the storm that drove him to shelter, not the hidden cellar he'd stumbled upon, but what he'd chosen to do with what he'd found. Tell the truth or stay silent, help others or help himself, retreat back into isolation or rejoin the world. He'd made his choice, and standing here, hand in his sister's kids' camping trip in his calendar, a memorial bearing his name standing in the mountains, and a future that felt possible again, he knew he'd chosen right. The sun dipped below the peaks, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Somewhere up in those mountains, the cliff cabin stood preserved, a testament to tragedy and truth. And somewhere, maybe, Russell Henshaw could finally rest, knowing his death hadn't been meaningless, that the secret he'd died protecting had finally been exposed. Marcus went inside to start dinner, Beth following him. Life continued, ordinary and precious. He'd found a fortune in a frozen cellar, yes, but the real treasure was learning that he could survive loss, expose truth, and still find joy in simple moments. Cooking dinner with someone who cared, planning trips with family, waking up and deciding to live instead of just exist. Anyone can find something valuable if they're willing to look. But it takes courage to understand that the greatest discoveries aren't always made of gold and currency. Sometimes they're made of truth, purpose, and the decision to stop running from life and start embracing it, consequences and all. Marcus Kane had gone into the mountains to hide from the world. He'd found a secret that changed it instead. And in doing so, he'd discovered something more valuable than $287 million. He'd discovered himself. The end. Up next, 2 more incredible true stories that will move you. Click now to continue the journey with us, and don't forget to hit subscribe if you believe that sometimes the things we find in our darkest moments are exactly what we need to step back into the light.